This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Man, there's a lot going on right now. A big win, the fifth government in a row, fifth majority for Scott Moe's Saskatchewan party. Tis the season for provincial elections, and we're going to kind of take a look across Canada today. We'll be talking to Jennifer Leywetz, a longtime Conservative staffer and strategist, coming up about 45 minutes from now. And in the meantime, we're going to be connecting with the lead columnist for Canada's National Observer, Max Fawcett. The BC NDP, led by David Eby, of course, flipping. I mean, this election result, so to speak, is kind of been in limbo a little bit. This thing too close to call with some recounts happening. Well, a critical Surrey riding flips means that David Eby's NDP will have a bit more of a comfortable position. We're going to be talking about that today. Of course, Danielle Smith, just days away in Alberta from her UCP leadership review. That's happening in Red Deer in just a few days from now, not to mention the American election, which is happening in like a week. So obviously a ton to get to. Max Fawcett, then Jennifer Leywetz in just a moment. This conversation happens with the presenting sponsorship of our friends at Business Career College. They've been in the business of financial education since 1997. They've been doing this a long time. And right now, I mean, a big part of what they're doing is making sure that you as a professional, a senior finance professional, are on the cutting edge of where you need to be to best serve your clients. You know, 3/4 of the new generation of investors say that they're interested in adding digital assets to their financial portfolios, which means they're going to have questions about decentralized finance and blockchain and NFTs and Bitcoin. And you want to be able to give them a credible answer. You want to be able to give them informed advice. So I want to draw your attention to this new designation program called the Certified Digital Asset Advisor designation. That's the CDAA. You can learn more about it at businesscareercollege.com. Invest in your continuing education, and the promo code Ryan20, all one word, Ryan20, is going to knock 20% off that investment in your career preparedness. That's Ryan20 when you get started today at businesscareercollege.com. I didn't even mention our interview with Federal Energy Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, where we talked about Ottawa's proposed emissions cap. Of course, we got into a very interesting conversation, one episode prior to this one, with Chris Severson-Baker from the Pembina Institute about the International Energy Agency's World Energy Outlook, talk about the energy transition and what that means for Canada and Alberta. Obviously, a ton to get to. And one of the guests on our roster, one of the regulars, one of the most popular guests with Real Talkers, and I think it's because he doesn't mind curveballs. I think it's because every once in a while he hits it out of the park, and he's definitely not afraid to take on any story, a news event that's happening in Canada. As a matter of fact, that's his job. At nationalobserver.com, it's Max Fawcett returning to the show. Max, welcome back. It's nice to see your face.
Nice to see you too. I love hitting curveballs, so I look forward to what you got.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Is there a curveball in the Saskatchewan election result? This is, there's a lot of storylines. Obviously, the NDP. It's kind of a similar story, not totally, but kind of similar to what happened in Alberta, where the NDP did really well in the cities. They did considerably better than they did last election, but at the end of the day, they still lost. Scott Moe, the Saskatchewan Party, a fifth consecutive majority. Are you surprised at all?
Not really. I mean, I think a lot of progressives got excited about those polls in the last little while that showed that the NDP could pull this out. But, as we've seen in Alberta many, many times, you really have to be perfect as a non-conservative party to win an election on the prairies. In BC, in Manitoba, the NDP parties there have a little room to work with. They don't have to win every single urban seat, for example, to win the election. But in Saskatchewan and Alberta, you really do have to run the table and then some. And it looks like the Saskatchewan NDP did not quite run the table and then couldn't do the and then some part. It's still a remarkable rebuke of Scott Moe's government. I think when you combine this with the outcome in New Brunswick, where Blaine Higgs got wiped off the map there, I think it speaks to the unpopularity of all this anti-trans stuff that these governments have been riding really hard to kind of whip up their base. I think it cost Blaine Higgs the election in New Brunswick. Maybe Saskatchewan isn't quite as as opposed to that issue. But, looking at the map in Saskatoon and Regina, it certainly seems like the big cities are. And so now Scott Moe has to try to govern a province, possibly without any MLAs in its two largest urban centers. And good luck with that.
Yeah, kind of an interesting dynamic as well with the Moe government, heading into the election with 22 of its 48 incumbents not running for re-election, which is a significant loss. I mean, two of them due to criminal charges. So, maybe that's addition by subtraction. But you also have an interesting dynamic, too. I agree with you. I was talking briefly yesterday. I had a chance to deliver the keynote down in Calgary, in my hometown, at the National Convention for the Canadian Association of Communicators in Education. So these are PR and comms management folks. These are like crisis communication managers for school boards, school districts all across the country. And, the New Brunswick election result, I think, was fresh, and we were talking a little bit of politics in the room. Always cool when you get in a room with people from literally coast to coast to coast. You know what I mean? You get all these different perspectives, and everybody was really chatty, and we had some great conversations. Anyway, the New Brunswick contingent, I said, are we oversimplifying the election there? Like, are we kind of dumbing it down a little too much? Are we drawing a direct line between, the so-called socially conservative, education policies that then Premier Higgs rolled out and the election result? And they were all like emphatically shaking their heads like they really do think that factored into it and maybe even directly influenced the result of that election. All of that to say, watching Saskatchewan, it kind of seemed like the big theme, or at least the narrative I think that the party leaders were keen on sticking to, was like housing costs, affordability, inflation, the economy. Didn't see a lot about parental rights stuff, like not a ton. I don't think it led to headlines. Didn't even see a lot about like environment, climate change. Like, not to say I'm surprised in that, but would you agree with the assessment? Like, very different storylines in the two provinces?
Yeah. I mean, I think conservatives understand that when they're speaking to the broader electorate, the anti-trans stuff does not play nearly as well or as favorably as it does when they're talking to their base. The problem is, when you spent months and months and months hammering on that one particular nail, and then you wield the hammer in a different direction, people maybe don't entirely believe that that's where your focus is going to be. And I think turning to Alberta and I don't want to jump ahead here, but turning to Danielle Smith's leadership review, she really is governing right now in the name of a few thousand people, and it really feels explicit and shameless. And we can get into that obviously a little more deeply, but I don't think that plays well with the broader electorate, especially in a time like we're in right now, where we do have genuine problems. Cost of living is still an issue. God knows what's going to happen in the United States next week. People are feeling uncertain. I think pollster David Coletto called it a scarcity mindset. And so in a scarcity mindset, talking about culture war stuff, talking about really kind of arcane legal issues, it doesn't really sit with a lot of people all that well. And I think that is to some extent what we saw in New Brunswick, in Saskatchewan, and even in BC. The NDP there kind of made the same mistake on the left, where they, I think, waded a little too far into things that please their base, culture war-ish things, rather than, growing the economy, making life more affordable. And they course corrected, I think, at the last possible second and pulled out, the slimmest of victories. But there's a lesson there for progressives as well about not over-indexing to your base.
Yeah, let's talk about BC. So it's been interesting, right? Like it's taken days and days and days for people to understand exactly what's going on. And the final count was just actually hours before. Did you just spill coffee all over your laptop?
I spilled a little bit of tea, but I'm all good.
Are we going to lose? If we lose you, we'll know why. No. You can check back in on your phone. But just 27 votes separating the Conservatives, the NDP in Surrey-Guildford, and worked out in favor of the BC NDP in the final count on Monday night. So that riding turns, and looks like the NDP will win a majority. David Eby has been invited by the Lieutenant Governor to form a government, et cetera, et cetera. So the wheels are in motion. But I don't know that a year ago, for sure not 18 months ago, David Eby and probably nobody in his camp would have thought that it was going to be this much of a squeaker win. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I remember looking at seat projection maps from last year, And it looked like the NDP might win 80 seats because you had this very kind of perfect vote split from their perspective, where you had BC United and the upstart BC Conservatives kind of battling for the Conservative vote. And it really did look like, unless they got their house in order, the NDP would win an even bigger majority. And I'm sure on some level he's a little bummed out about that. But I promise you, having a caucus with 80 MLAs in a 93 MLA legislature, that's not a lot of fun either, because you have to manage a bunch of egos who don't have cabinet seats, and they're bored and they're making mischief. And so, I'm sure he would like a little bit more of a margin than he got in this election, but it's something he can work with for sure. It's interesting about the BC election. We for the first time, I think, in Canada, we saw, and I wrote about this today, we saw the outbreak of election truthers. People who were suggesting that the vote was rigged, that the elections workers were producing ballots from unknown places. And of course, our old friend David Parker was at the forefront of these efforts. And belatedly, we saw some Conservative staffers come out and try to pour some cold water on that. Yesterday, John Rustad, in a very tepid statement, finally said, he accepts the results, and the BC election workers did a good job. But it's something to watch for, that this has now come across the border. This idea that if your side doesn't win the election and it's close, you can just pretend that it was fraudulent, or that it didn't happen. And I don't know how we stuff that genie back in the bottle, to be honest with you.
I'm going to award 2 points right now to James in the Real Talk Live chat, who has just posted, "Ooh, we're spilling the tea." So there you go. That's 2 points for you, James. You can redeem those in our online shop. Johnny manages the points and how they're dispersed, and when I've created a mess for myself,
I don't want to take that role on.
Hand things over to you,
but I will if forced.
I think we do need, what we need is just like a whiteboard with, and we can just do the Roman numerals as Real Talkers collect their points, and we'll find a way they can redeem them for mugs or something like that. Talk to us, Max. Every time you're on the show, you subtly and slyly unveil a new mug. I'm not sure that you've ever shown up with a mug, the same mug twice. Today it appears as though you're rocking the tea version of Brass Knuckles.
That's right.
Where did you find this?
Some online shop. I think I had this all the way back when I was working in government, and it's tarnished and scuffed, but it's come with me a long way. And I like going into meetings with that as my mug. It sort of set a tone.
Yeah.
And it's actually quite comfortable. So,
to say the least. We talked to Mo Amir out in Vancouver, host of This Is Van Color, ahead of the BC election. People can check that out September 26th. We have a highlight posted as well. It's about a 2-minute clip we put together. Him answering if John Rustad is too extreme for BC. I would suggest that Rustad navigated the waters relatively well to just barely lose that election, which sucks if you're him. But this guy was in like no man's land a year and a half, 2 years ago. As Mo pointed out, kicked out of his party at that time on his birthday. And he tells the story of how over Guinness's, his now chief of staff convinced him to stay into politics. Kind of a remarkable rise, but now the question, and Mo does a good job articulating it, is, can Rustad, after this election, keep control of this party? Which is, I won't say a group of rogues, but like nobody quite totally understands what the BC Conservatives are all about. That's fair to say for sure. They're not the BC Liberals that went before them. So what are you watching for from Rustad and from BC's opposition over its first few months and maybe the next year?
Yeah, I think they built this plane while it was in the air and did a pretty impressive job of getting it up to altitude. But now they need to make sure that all the screws and parts actually fit and it doesn't fall out of the sky again. And I think that is going to be a challenge. That it's easy to keep people in line when you're rising in the polls, when you look like you might actually form government. People will hold their tongue. People will will play ball. Now they're staring at 4 years in opposition if the NDP can manage the legislature and their thin majority well. And I think then you will start seeing people get a little antsier, get a little more restless and anxious. And is Rustad strong enough to hold that party together? I would bet that at some point you're going to see him get pushed out as leader, which is, nice work. That's not the turn of phrase I'm looking for. It's not much of a thank you for turning this party from a nothing into almost the government, that they're going to suddenly push him out of the way because they want a better leader. But I do think they need someone who speaks a little more to the urban parts of the province, who's maybe a little younger, a little less sort of a Facebook grandpa, and a little more of a someone who can speak to the generational issues that British Columbians face. And I don't think they're going to lack for options there. There's a guy in the Lower Mainland named Brad West, who all the political parties have tried to recruit. I bet you this job looks very attractive to someone like him. And someone like Brad West or someone of his ilk would be a much tougher customer for David Eby and the NDP in the next election. So, they should enjoy the time they have, and I would suggest they should implement the policies they think are important. But I would not be betting on another majority in the next provincial election.
Yeah. Other side of the country, like way across Canada, I think maybe a few people are at least surprised that Nova Scotia's Premier Tim Houston's called an election 3 years ago. He passed into law a fixed election date. And so he's going back on what he made law 3 years ago. They're supposed to be going to the polls next July. He says that basically, if I can paraphrase, that province's affordability crisis is so bad that he's looking for a new mandate. Obviously, they want to probably release a budget that has something to do with this. It's going to, whatever. So there's the story of he goes back on his own fixed election date. Quite honestly, real talk, I'm not sure the average person gives a flying fuck about that. But I do think it's kind of an interesting strategy. It's what Jim Prentice did in Alberta, right? It's kind of the same thing, ish. I mean, I acknowledge we're talking a long time apart here, but many years have passed in between. But do you see some similarities there, looking for that new mandate amid tough economic circumstances?
Does have that ring to it, doesn't it? Of 2015 in Alberta, where although Prentice was sort of a new leader, and he thought he wanted a fresh mandate.
Yeah, fair.
Tim Houston already won an election as leader. It feels maybe a little bit like John Rustad in 2020, and it didn't backfire on them at all. There was a lot of people making John Horgan, excuse me, for the NDP. And there's a lot of people made a lot of noises back then about how he was taking advantage of the pandemic. Voters are going to punish him for, being opportunistic. And they won, I believe, their biggest majority in NDP history. So I just to your point, I don't think voters get that agitated about these sorts of procedural issues. I'm sure there are, a small number of people who really believe in the purity and sanctity of the system, but most people just want their problems addressed. And if he can make the case that, a fresh majority government will help him do a better job of helping them with their day-to-day lives, I really don't think voters are going to care. But it is a test, because we've seen a bunch of conservative incumbent governments go to the polls lately and get their butts handed to them. Almost in Saskatchewan, definitely in New Brunswick, definitely in Manitoba. And so he's kind of playing with fire a little bit here. Yes, the polls seem to suggest that he's, comfortably in majority territory, but as we've seen in many provincial elections, things can shake up and change very, very quickly. So it'll be an interesting data point to throw into the set.
We're just getting started with Max Fawcett, lead columnist of Canada's National Observer. When we come back, I want to ask you, I want to stay on the BC election. One more question, because you've got a new column out. People can read it at nationalobserver.com. BC election truthers are a bad sign for democracy. And I think there may be a link to conversation around the U.S. election coming up November 5th, and maybe even to Danielle Smith's leadership review, which is coming up this weekend at the UCP AGM in Red Deer. More from Max Fawcett in just a quick second. This conversation is happening with the support of Friesen Brothers. I want to put one thing on your radar, because I know it's circled on our family's calendar. As November 1st approaches, the first of every single month, I want to remind you, Friesen Brothers knocks 15% off all grocery purchases, $75 or more. So whether that's just for you or your family, that's a huge deal at checkout. 15% off, $75 or more, the first of every month at Friesen Brothers. And don't forget, on November 2nd and 3rd, they've got their vegan feast coming up as well, from 4 to 8 p.m. at all of their Edmonton region stores. That's Rabbit Hill, Glenora, Stony Plain, shout out to Stony Plain, and Fort Saskatchewan. It's an all-you-can-eat vegan buffet plus salad bar for just $22 a person. You can't beat it. It would cost you more to make it yourself at home. More information available at friesen.com/vegan. At California Closets, they are the absolute best in the business at customizing storage solutions, custom closets as well for the entire home. You know, I'm going to tell you something anecdotally. Just the other day, this is a true story. Our little Noah Bear, he's just 2 years old. He's fascinated, John, by the big subwoofer that we have in our entertainment center.
The wobbly box.
You know, the big wobbly box. You know, the one that makes the parties that much cooler. And so it's masterfully built into the entertainment center the California Closet's put together, and it's behind glass if you need it. So Noah opens the glass and then goes to slam it, and I winced for just a second thinking there were going to be glass shards everywhere. And then I remembered how nice and soft those things close. No matter how hard you slam them, California Closets can withstand abuse from 2-year-old toddlers and years of serving your family. It's guaranteed for life. Request your free consultation today at californiaclosets.ca. And a shout out to our friends at Complete Care Restoration, hard at work in Jasper and across the province of Alberta on a ton of different projects. They've got teams deployed everywhere that folks are looking to restore their property and probably more importantly, rebuild their peace of mind. With years of experience, they use state-of-the-art technology and environmentally friendly methods to bring your space back to life. Don't wait for damage to happen. If you've discovered mold, if you got smoke damage, contact Complete Care Restoration today and experience the peace of mind that comes with expert care. Hanging out with Max Fawcett. Jennifer Laywet's joining us in about 25 minutes from Saskatchewan. We'll get her take on what went down there. Max, of course, lead columnist for Canada's National Observer. He's got a column out, BC Election Truthers, a bad sign for democracy. Max, I think everybody knows what we're talking about here, but take us into it. Why were you prompted to write about it?
Just seeing the outbreak of a thing that we saw in 2020 and fallout from 2020 that is now apparently part of American political culture in perpetuity, which is that Republicans don't trust the results of elections, think that elections are inherently sort of worthy of suspicion and sites of fraudulent activity. That never used to happen in Canada. I mean, I remember the BC election in 2017. It was even closer than the one we just had in just a few weeks ago. And nobody suggested that, elections BC was cooking the books. No one complained about how long it took to count the ballots. It actually took longer in 2017. I believe this was the fastest count that Elections BC has done in the last 4 or 5 elections. There's no issue with the tabulators. They all work fantastically well. But we saw people, whether it was Postmedia's Tristan Hopper, whether it was Eva Chipiuk, the convoy lawyer, a bunch of other sort of personalities on the further reaches of the right who were not saying that it was rigged, but were intoning, well, we should ask questions. This doesn't look right, and we have to improve the transparency and oversight of our elections. And no, we don't, because we already have really well managed, really well overseen elections. It's not an issue. It's only an issue because folks in the more sort of extremely online parts of the right want to make it an issue because it's about undermining trust in institutions. It's about undermining trust, more broadly, just trust, capital T trust. And I appreciate that, like I said, that there were some staffers from the BC Conservative Party who came out and quashed that. Anthony Koch.
Koch, Coke.
Yeah.
It's like in Alberta, Kate's, Cats,
Yeah.
What about in BC, Lougheed, Alberta, Lougheed? I'm not trying to take us off onto a tailspin, but I'm a bit of a
No, but
this.
they did a good job. But the problem was the politicians didn't. Rustad was dead silent until yesterday. Polyev hasn't said a word about it. And I don't think it would cost them much to say our elections are safe, our elections are sound, everyone needs to stand down, except that they're afraid of their own supporters on some level. And I think we see that very clearly in Alberta. We got rid of our electronic tabulators here. Municipalities can't use them anymore. There's no evidence that they had any problems with them, like literally none whatsoever. Rob Breckenridge had a great column where he really went into chapter and verse about how stupid this decision was. It's going to cost money to municipalities that I'm sure they won't get back from the province.
Did you see the Edmonton Public School Board, Trish Estabrooks, who, for the record, is the federal NDP candidate in Edmonton Centre. She'll be vacating her position as chair of the Edmonton Public School Board. But she revealed just a couple of days ago, we talked about it on yesterday's episode, it's going to cost the Edmonton Public School Board has the contract to administer the elections, municipal elections in the city of Edmonton. It's going to cost the Edmonton Public Board $1.8 million to accommodate the change. The school board swallows the cost.
Yeah, it's depressing, to be honest with you, because if there was evidence that this was impacting the speed of the count or something like that, then maybe that's an issue. But in the last election, the problem wasn't the tabulators. The problem was the increase in the number of voting places, and then they had to bring all the ballots back to be tabulated. So it's just importing this sort of conspiracy-minded approach to democracy from the United States, and it doesn't benefit anyone. It certainly doesn't benefit, the school board and other municipal partners who have to administer these elections.
Yeah, I was reading in the New York Times, I think it came out about a week ago, Republicans who led the 2020 election denial now sowing doubt in 2024 votes. You can see it. I'm showing on my screen right now. Like this is like they haven't even voted yet. And there's already a movement.
It's just, as you guys are talking, it just seems ridiculous to me because like common sense tells me it'd be easier to bribe voting counters, humans,
right,
than it is to hack these modern technological machines that data says are pretty much inhackable.
Well, and and it's a good point. And there's also, there's a comment here from Super Chat Ken who says, we actually have MLAs in Alberta that have stated that vote tabulators can be hacked. Ken says, because somehow he says OCR, I Googled it. I'm not going to pretend like I knew this ahead of time, but an OCR is optical character recognition, which is like the electronic conversion of images in a typed, handwritten, or printed text into machine encoded text. This is like basic tech. Ken says, somehow a simple machine with a memory card is hackable. Come on. Right. But that's not the point. Like I was joking with somebody the other day, like let's say hypothetically you're work with me here on the metaphor. Okay. But like, let's say you're opening a bakery and you're opening it right across the street of the other bakery. And you just go out in front of your bakery and you put up signs and you say, hey, come to Jespo's bakery because we don't put home insulation in our dough. And then everyone's going, well, wait, do the other guys put insulation in their dough? Like, no, I'm just telling the truth. I'm just saying we don't put insulation in our dough. But we've created doubt. We've all of a sudden created this whole movement against this bakery that's been there for 30 years, waking up at 3 a.m, baking the bread, grandma's old recipe, the whole 9 yards. But all of a sudden people are wondering now, can we trust them? Can the whole thing, can any bakery be trusted? Right? That's the play. The play is not even that you've got proof or evidence. The play is that all you're trying to do is create uncertainty so people will believe you when you start saying the election is stolen, right?
Yeah, 100%. And, Johnny makes a good point. Is people have studied the accuracy and efficacy of ballot counting machines versus hand counting. And hand counting loses every time, like it's the Washington Generals against the Harlem Globetrotters. Like the amount of error that is introduced in the system through humans is literally like many factors higher than the error that's introduced by machines, because machines are more reliable than us. Counting ballots is tedious work. Humans suck at doing tedious work. Machines are excellent at doing tedious work. So you're right. It's really more a broader play to push people away from institutions that they have known and trusted and towards new sources of authority. And those sources are, online blogs or YouTube channels or influencers or whatever it is. It's a desire to kind of disaggregate people from the societies and the institutions that they have come to trust. And that may play well for the influencers and the people doing this in the near term. It's very, very bad for all of us in the longer run. And I think we're seeing that play out right now in the United States.
They do this thing in Vegas like every year where they get people to come down and try and hack voting machines.
Really?
So I'm not saying it's impossible. But I mean, these are like some of the most skilled hackers in the entire United States.
This is like a public thing?
Yeah, I just read an article right there. They just did it like 9 months ago or whatever. But they because every year they update
Has
software.
anyone done it?
Of course they have. They've shown. But these are like highly skilled hackers. So to me, like, I know it can be done, but I'm just saying, like what Max is saying, people who are tired counting votes for hours and hours, or somebody who could be easily bribed with a few $100 seems more dangerous than international hackers. hackers coming in.
This seems to me to be the type of story that you and I are going to have to go investigate in Las Vegas. Max, you're invited to come. Well, we'll turn it into a Real Talk Patreon party. We'll turn it into a patron party. I like that. Tracy in the chat says it doesn't matter what it is. As soon as somebody suggests something contrary, there will be people lined up to believe it. I also have some folks like Sharon's putting in order. She wants me to do some baking for her. Acute Awareness says you would buy my baked goods if I start a bakery. My baked goods would be very expensive, and you would not be allowed to operate heavy machinery after eating them. Let's just put it that way. We've also got people chiming in on, how about this? Ken says, according to elections, Alberta vote tabulators go through a random test before and after elections and in close counts and are backed up by hand counts, which is true. I did actually way back in the day, just after graduating university and before I started my career, because that took several years and a couple of international trips with my friends first. But I did work in election, and it was like a very interesting experience. And I will say, like, election workers obviously take the gig very seriously, and there's oversights and supervision as you would expect. But it was an interesting thing to be a part of. As it was happening, and to sort of have some insight into the process. Have you ever worked an election back in the day?
Yeah, I mean, I would go one step further. I would say it's almost magical as someone who likes politics and democracy. Mm-hmm. I've been an election worker, and I've been in count rooms as candidate representatives, and it's amazing. It's a bunch of people trying their best to get the numbers right, and they don't make many mistakes, and when they do, they're caught. And there's a beauty of watching democracy unfold without violence, without threats, without recourse. Mm-hmm. And I think we fail to appreciate how unusual that is in the scope of human history and how fragile it is. We're already starting to see that kind of fall apart in the United States. And I really, I think that. And it is conservatives. I hate to be the guy who always, blames conservatives, but on this one, that's where this is coming from. And so we need leadership from their leaders to snuff this stuff out, because, we don't want to go down that road where every election is not just about counting the votes, but about litigating them afterwards.
Mm-hmm. And there's differences here, because we're talking about voting machines and then voting tabulators as well, right? Here's that story if you wanted to see it, right? In Las Vegas, it was in August. They had them do it. And
James is in our chat. He's looking out for us before our Vegas trip. He says this makes sense too. He says, I would highly recommend you speak with a cybersecurity expert. We're going to have to get one back on the show. I'm thinking of Tom, what's his name? The super smart guy at the University of Calgary. Future, that guy I'm talking about, Max? Anyway, he says we got to speak with a cybersecurity expert before attending either of these conferences in Vegas. He says, James does, there are precautions we'll want to take to secure our own data. Yeah, no kidding. Oh, wow. It's like becoming you're like befriending a pickpocket. Like, watch your own wallet. Danielle Smith has a huge weekend ahead of her. The UCP AGM in Red Deer. Popular premiers have fallen at the hands of their own parties. You'd have to work pretty hard to compare Ralph Klein and Danielle Smith. Obviously, King Ralph held the position for more than a decade, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Jason Kenney's another example. Like his own party turns on him. For him, it was the right-wing flank, and for her, it could be the exact same thing. The only difference is that Kenney didn't really rely on the right-wing flank to cruise to victory in the first place. Depending on who you believe, depending on who you talk to, there's organizing happening, and some of the right-wingers have turned on the premier, including Take Back Alberta's David Parker and other operatives. There's a lot of pressure on her from former progressive conservatives. Thomas Lukaszik's been hammering away at her every single day on social media. What are you expecting to see in Red Deer this weekend?
I mean, on some level, it's very impressive. The number of people that they have coming down to that convention.
They say there's like 6,000 or 7,000.
Yeah, I mean, it is a massive exercise in democracy, and I'm sure there are lots of people who are driving down there to vote against her. I think there's far more that are going to be driving down to vote for her. I don't think she's at any real risk of having a bad outcome here. But that's because she has spent the last year basically governing towards this moment. She has been putting in policies, implementing legislation, communicating around issues almost entirely with her leadership vote in mind, not with the best interests of Albertans in mind. And I think it's rare for me to say a nice thing about Jason Kenney, but maybe that was the mistake that Jason Kenney made, is he thought he was the premier of the province. And Smith understands her assignment as a conservative in Alberta, which is that she's the premier of her party, and the rest of us kind of have to just go along for the ride. It's unfair on some level. I mean, the NDP, when they were in government, did the exact opposite. They didn't govern in the name of Gil McGowan and the Alberta Federation of Labor. They governed to appeal to conservatives and red Tories. They tried to, talk a good game about oil and gas. They, talked about the economy. They were forever trying to win those votes that they didn't have. And Danielle Smith has been forever trying to win the votes that got her there in the first place. So it's not a good outcome for the rest of us, for people who want their problems solved and want good policies put in place. But I do think she'll survive this pretty easily, because she has been working backwards from it from the very beginning.
Yeah. Behind the scenes, a couple of, GR agencies and that put on this annual, mingler, a mixer, first day of fall session, Alberta legislature, and attended last night. So I'll shout out Diplomat Consulting and U.S. Public Affairs. They kind of pretty much bring everybody in there. There's like pretty much not every opposition MLA, but a ton of them. Premier was there, like cabinet ministers, kind of the who's who. It's pretty interesting to like read the room, see who's talking to whom and all that kind of thing. I won't spill too much on what happens, because that's kind of the spirit of the event, but I will say I spoke to Premier for a while. Now, obviously, politicians are going to politic, but she doesn't give off the impression that she's sweating this weekend. But I do think that, it's kind of on her radar. I want to ask you a question. I was talking to one of her staffers about this. I mean, people are saying they're going to be busing in, you've probably heard it. And I don't mean to be glib about this. When you start talking about religious groups, I'm not trying to be dismissive or offensive, but like people are saying, they're busing in thousands of Muslims, and then all of a sudden everybody goes, ooh, like all these Muslim students from these private schools and all this kind of thing. Whether or not that happens remains to be seen. Wouldn't be the first time that organizers have worked hard to achieve a result. But here's an interesting one, and this is part of the UCP's modus operandi. It's in their constitution to vote at the AGM. You can vote at 14 years of age at the AGM. You can't obviously vote in an election until you're 18. Some people might say it's great to get the youth involved. Others may have their concerns. I just want to pick your brain on this. What do you make of the rule? UCP doesn't have to apologize for it. It's any party can do whatever it wants, but 14-year-olds, you at 14, able to, do you think, cast a credible vote that'll count the same as a 44-year-olds at the AGM?
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good question. I've always been a supporter of being able to vote in elections when you're 16, because if we're letting people pay taxes, if we're letting them drive vehicles, even with supervision, then they should be able to vote. They have a stake in a lot of things that are happening in their own lives. 14 is a little too young for me. 14. You're a little too underdeveloped, I think, to really be able to weigh the pros and cons of what you're doing. And I do think it opens the door to busing, to using people in perhaps private schools as kind of vote cannon fodder. And look, the Muslim stuff doesn't concern me at all. It actually feels a little racist on some level, because
of course it is.
Those people have had no problem with white Catholics and white Christians being bussed in to vote in leadership votes before. So, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Mm-hmm. The problem is, I think any busing of minors into a political convention for the purposes of electing a candidate, it just feels a little greasy. And again, like you said, it's their party, it's their rules. They can do whatever they want with it. But I would put it at 16.
Yeah, it feels greasy, but it's also like, those are the rules. And so if you don't want to get beat by the rules, then play by the same rules. It's kind of the same thing. It's not the same thing at all, actually. But like when the Tampa Bay Lightning stuffs their superstars away on long-term injured reserve and then brings them back in the playoffs to circumvent the salary cap and then wins the Stanley Cup, Vegas can do the same thing. I think a lot of teams are probably going to look into it. Anyway, I mean, they're playing by the rules. Like, you may not like the rules, but they're playing by the rules. Ms. KD in our live chat on YouTube says Danielle Smith's last-minute Bill of Rights will save her. We talked yesterday on the show, Johnny and I did, about the Jordan Peterson law. She's describing it, which these aren't necessarily the same things, but she says she's going to protect free speech for professionals that fall into the purvey or the accrediting bodies, the colleges, like doctors, lawyers, accountants, psychology professors, and the like. Naming it after Jordan Peterson, obviously, an astute move to put a lot of attention on it. As I said yesterday in a rant on TikTok, I don't think that this is an issue that's really affecting many Albertans, maybe like 15 of them. It's not going to solve the affordability crisis. It's not going to solve healthcare wait times, but it might help her survive the leadership review. After the leadership review, assuming that she's A-OK and smooth sailing, you expect the governance to return back to like focusing on what actually does impact millions of people in this part of the country?
You would hope. I think, as we get closer to the 2027 election call, she will definitely have to start delivering on some of the things she promised the rest of us, the tax cut, some of the changes. We would need to see some like positive outcomes in healthcare, because she's made a big deal of busting and breaking that whole system up. So I do think her focus will shift a little bit, but the party always has the ability to sort of recapture her attention if they decide to mount another threat to her leadership. It's never truly over. You can never truly kind of put the base to rest when it comes to Conservatives in Alberta. And I think she may find, we'll see, she may find that all these attempts at virtue signaling, and that's all the Jordan Peterson stuff and the Bill of Rights stuff is. It's conservative virtue signaling all the way down. That just raises expectations among these people that they're going to continue to have the Premier's undivided attention as she goes forward. And if she doesn't give them that undivided attention, they may get angry again. So there's sort of a Aesopian fable here at work of the more you feed the beast, the bigger the beast gets, and the hungrier it gets. And I'm not sure that she can put it on a diet after this weekend's festivities.
A couple of weeks ago, we talked to the federal energy minister, Jonathan Wilkinson, about Ottawa's proposed emissions cap. And people can check out the interview if they want to know what he has to say about it. I appreciated his candor. I thought it was a good conversation. We talked a lot about carbon capture. We talked about carbon taxes, a whole bunch of stuff. Well, Alberta's energy minister, Brian Jean, not pleased, to say the very least, about this proposed emissions cap, and had this to say just a short time ago.
I don't know if you've heard recently from Canada's Natural Resource Minister, Minister Wilkinson, suggesting that oil is at a peak and that we're not going to see future years of growth.
Oil and gas will peak this decade. In fact, oil is probably peaking this year. It will leave Canada uncompetitive and poorer on a go-forward basis.
That's out of touch, my friends. Every expert in the world agrees that oil and gas are nowhere near its peak, that we're going to see continued growth for some time. But the truth is that if he does believe, as he said, that oil actually makes Canadians poorer, well, please, Minister Wilkinson, Prime Minister Trudeau, give us the money back that you'd get every year from Alberta and that you don't give us back in services. Because we're growing at record numbers. People are fleeing other jurisdictions to come to Alberta. And they're doing that because they know that Alberta's the choice. Because we have good jobs, a good quality of life, and a great future for all people that come to Alberta.
Everything sounds better with a cello beneath it. That's Alberta's Energy Minister, Brian Jean. He's not wrong. Alberta's population is growing. Alberta's economy is healthy. The International Energy Agency and its World Energy Outlook does forecast that oil will peak demand-wise by 2030. What's your take on the position of the Alberta government here? I mean, it's just obviously more fighting with Ottawa, but at some point, people are going to expect a policy position. How much of an impact does this have on the dynamic between the Alberta and federal governments?
I talked to Minister Wilkinson last week as well. I don't think he particularly minds this. He understands that it's theater for a purpose, and that he has different conversations behind the scene. I know that the UCP probably doesn't want its base to know that, but this is doing a tremendous disservice to his own voters, his own base, and most of all, his own community in Fort McMurray, to pretend that every expert in the world believes that oil and gas demand is going to grow for the foreseeable future, and that this is just some liberal fantasy. In addition to the International Energy Agency, you have Rystad, which is a energy outlook agency. You have Equinor, which is an oil and gas company, the Norwegian oil and gas company. You have BP. They're all saying that demand for oil is going to peak within the decade. We have to, at some point in Alberta, have a conversation about that, have an honest reckoning of, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for demand for our product? What happens if, OPEC, which is holding, I believe, 4 million barrels of reserve supply behind, what if they decide to do what they did in 2014 and start fighting for market share instead of price? What if they drive prices down so they can have more of the market? What does that mean for Alberta's, provincial tax revenues, for jobs here, for drilling activity? We are not having that conversation because we have a provincial government that refuses to live in the real world. It lives in this fantasy where, you know, the past is the future, and oil and gas demand will grow forever. And we're going to wake up one day and be left with a giant mess on our hands. And I think a lot of people are going to be very frustrated with the Conservatives in this province who didn't shoot straight with them, who didn't have an honest conversation about what do we do? How do we take advantage of this situation? How do we maximize our economy for the world that we live in, not the world that we'd like to imagine we live in?
Are you like the emissions cap? Like, I understand. Well, I guess I don't understand. I understand like the very surface level, like how a lot of people are, you know, I mean, economists have kind of gone to bat for like a consumer carbon tax. But I know that some analysts have also said that is kind of like a conservative solution. Like, I'm talking politically, like ideologically, it's kind of more of a conservative solution. This idea of the cap, it seems to me to be kind of like arguable from a common sense perspective that it would hinder or limit economic activity vis-a-vis employment. Like, I do understand that to a certain degree. And I guess now the question is, like, optically, you know, the prime minister as support for the carbon tax, I won't even say is wavering. It's like evaporated. Like, right? Like, you've got like Jagmeet Singh saying no carbon tax. David Eby walked it back. Alberta NDP leadership candidates, Raki Pancholi, said it's time to look at getting rid of the carbon. I mean, like, you've got like the left walking away from the carbon tax. So obviously Trudeau's got to pivot. Is this emissions cap, in your mind, in your opinion, the former editor of Alberta Oil magazine, like, is this the right way to do it?
No, the right way to do it would have been industrial carbon pricing and you know, ratcheting up the stringency and getting reductions from the oil and gas industry. But it hasn't happened. You know, the Pembina Institute came out recently with a report that showed that per barrel emissions intensities. So, you know, we talk about emissions. Everyone agrees overall emissions for the oil and gas industry keep going up. But the talking point from the Alberta government has been per barrel emissions intensities are down since 2011. Well, guess what? They're up since 2018. So from 2018 to the present, they're actually going up on a per barrel basis. That's not good enough. We're not going to get to net zero by 2050 if they're going up right now. And we're already starting from one of the highest levels of per barrel intensity on Earth. So we need a forcing mechanism. We need something that is going to force the industry to make the investments in emissions reductions that it says it wants to. And let's be clear, the emissions cap really just formalizes the pledges that the oil sands companies have been making for years. It took the emissions reductions that they said they could make by 2030 under the Pathways Initiative and says, okay, we're going to put that into legislation. And then all of a sudden they could put their hands up and they go, whoa, 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 not so fast. But why not so fast? You said you could do it by 2030. Why can you not suddenly do it by 2030? You know, it's time for the industry to put its money where its mouth is. I've been saying this for a long time now. And I know why they don't want to. They want to keep ragging the puck and hope that, you know, some magic technology comes along down the road, direct air capture, something like that will give them a get out of jail free card. But we've been waiting long enough, you know, on the actual substantive reductions we need to see. And look, as the world goes forward and demand starts to roll over, you know, countries like the United States and Europe put in border carbon mechanisms where they're pricing carbon at the border. If our oil is not competitive on an emissions basis, it will not be competitive on an economic basis. And that was the point that Jonathan Wilkinson made to me. And when I talk to him, it's the point he makes to the government of Alberta all the time. What they're trying to do is help the Alberta oil and gas industry be competitive in the landscape of tomorrow. And Danielle Smith, Brian Jean either don't understand that or don't want to understand that.
Hanging out with Max Fawcett. Let me just, I mean, we talked to Jonathan Wilkinson about this, and I think it's worth revisiting. People can check out, obviously, our full interview with the federal energy minister in our podcast archives. You find it on YouTube as well. Danielle Smith he kind of paints a picture, and then he responds. This was on Real Talk a short time ago.
Engineering and innovation will help solve the emissions challenge. Instead, the federal government plans to use a sledgehammer to kill a fly.
I think the Premier is perhaps a little reacting a little early, and her reaction is a little over the top. We need to reduce emissions. It has to be true across all sectors of the economy. That's true in transportation. It's true in buildings. It's true everywhere. And certainly it's also true in oil and gas, which is the one area where emissions continue to go up right now, and it represents almost a third of Canada's emissions.
That's Jonathan Wilkinson on Real Talk. So, I mean, obviously, I thought, like, to be honest, he was pretty pragmatic, like pretty kind of common sense through it all. I just think, like, as a citizen, and I understand that somebody that's working like as a pipeliner or a driller or whatever is obviously going to have, I mean, if you're making your living feeding your family in the oil sands, you're going to have a different perspective than somebody that talks in hypotheticals or policy wonks. But, like, I think everybody understands that, like, there's an energy transition happening. That's undeniable. We talked to, Chris Severson Baker from Pembina Institute. We'll play a clip from him in just a minute. Like, that is happening, obviously. And I think that a lot of people are bang on. I mean, our chat yesterday, Max, was all about people talking about just even replacing words. Replace oil and gas with energy. Alberta is Canada's energy capital. Canada can be one of the world's, most secure energy providers. And that's obviously got to, involve investment in transition, including helping people transition their skill sets and their careers. But I mean, that's something that governments have been tasked with over decades, even over centuries. Like, this is nothing new. And I understand why everything is so hot button, why everybody gets so upset, because, like, somebody's pulling food off your family's table. Darn tootin', you're going to get pissed off about it. But I just hope we can have, like, normal conversations about this, including the people that are the stakeholders, the people that have like the mud on their boots,
Well, it's funny that we live in the province that popularized the phrase "skate to where the puck is going," and we have a government and a political, a part of our political dynamic that refuses to see where the puck is going. They are determined. They have all the fans in the audience looking the other direction so that they don't see where the puck is going. But we all know it's going there. We all know that we don't all know. Most of us know. Some of us know. The big threat to the prosperity of Albertans out there working in the field and working in the head offices is not a Trudeau government in Ottawa. It's the energy transition that's happening in China, in Europe, in America, in India, around the world. And we need to get our heads around that. I thought it was really telling. The Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, the big lobby for oil and gas companies, or one of them, is out with an ad campaign against the cap, the emissions cap, of course. And one of their arguments is they list all the countries in the world without an emissions cap, and then they put Canada next to it, and it says, we're the only ones without an emissions cap. Putting us next to, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, United States, Norway, you name it. And they mean it like it's a bad thing. They mean the fact that we have an oil and gas emissions cap is a bad thing. But it's a good thing, right? If you believe that we have ethical oil, if you believe that Canada is the most ethical source of oil and gas production on the world, an oil and gas emissions cap is amazing advertising material for you. You get to take that around to the rest of the world and say, see all these other laggards? They don't have an emissions cap, but we do, because we're the best in the world. And the fact that the industry thinks that that's a threat rather than an opportunity shows how unserious they are about the challenge that lies ahead.
And can we all acknowledge that we could be talking about something completely different and a lot of this work being undone on or before October 20th of 2025, when it's expected that Canadians will, it'll be the referendum on Justin Trudeau is basically what it's going to be. And potentially Pierre Poilievre becoming Canada's next prime minister. A lot of this entire conversation would be entirely different, wouldn't it? Under a conservative
look,
prime minister?
Justin Trudeau will almost certainly be the biggest loser in that election, but a close second will be Danielle Smith, because she's going to lose the best punching bag she has ever had. She has used Trudeau to basically frighten people away from a conversation about her own government, about her own choices, and about her own policies, and she'll lose that when Pierre Poilievre is the prime minister. Now, look, I'm not deluded enough to think that they'll stop using him as a punching bag. They'll keep trying. It could be 2026, 2027. They'll still be blaming Justin Trudeau for whatever's happening. But that argument loses a lot of credibility when you can't see his face and hear his voice. And I think conservatives have to start thinking about that, is that they're going to have to start standing on their own 2 feet rather than just constantly dragging the liberal boogeyman out and frightening people with that, because it's not going to work once Pierre Poilievre is the prime minister.
The International Energy Agency, IEA, out with its World Energy Outlook. It comes out every year. The 2024 edition just released, I guess it was about 10 days ago. We talked to the executive director of the Pembina Institute in our most recent episode of the show, the one right before this, Chris Severson-Baker. We talked about the energy transition, what it could mean for Alberta. He's actually very optimistic, to be honest with you. I appreciated the spirit of the conversation. Max, I wanted to, of course, pick your brain on this, knowing that you were coming up the episode after him. But for those that haven't yet had a chance to check it out, here's a quick highlight.
We're too slow to respond to that clear signal that's coming from outside, and that's why we're trying to bring some of these voices from outside of Alberta, like the International Energy Agency, into the conversation in Alberta, because there just isn't enough conversation happening about how to prepare for that future. And we have time. We don't have a lot of time, but we have time to take advantage of things like the fact that we can produce a lot of clean electricity quite affordably. Again, we were leading the province in this area, and that's something that we could really lean into. And if we were to combine that with our ability to put a lot of carbon underground and safely store it, then you've got something that is kind of unique in the world. There's not a lot of places where you have that sort of proven carbon capture and storage capacity and technology in the sector, combined with the ability to produce a lot of clean, affordable, renewable energy. And that's something that we haven't really sort of grabbed onto as an opportunity in Alberta. Most of our energy products are being sold as fuel, but hopefully we can create markets for some of the sources to go into products, right? That's really the future, I think, for the province of Alberta. Can we produce a very clean source of natural gas that's a feedstock for chemical production? Can we use bitumen to make products, materials, and things like that, rather than relying on people to continuing to demand our energy for transportation fuel?
That was Chris Severson-Baker of the Pembina Institute on our most recent episode of Real Talk, talking about all kinds of stuff. Max, we got into it with him on like wind and solar, nuclear, geothermal, the whole 9 yards. What do you make of what you heard from him and the world energy outlook and kind of what it means for Canada?
He's right. We do have this opportunity in front of us to catch up to the puck, and we have assets that most places in the world would only, dream of having. We can use bitumen for things other than combustion, and actually, for much higher uses, whether it's carbon fiber in construction, advanced materials. Like, there's all sorts of really cool things that we can be doing with this giant endowment of bitumen that we have in our backyard. But we have to first accept and embrace the fact that there is an energy transition, that it is going to mean reduced demand for oil and gas, and that we have to respond to that. And I do think we're not going to get down the road of solutions and capturing opportunities until we can come to an agreement on the challenge we face. And we're not there yet. I really appreciate that they bring folks like, the International Energy Agency in. That, I read in one of the stories about that conference, I was there, that, that it was controversial. The speaker they brought could not have been less controversial. But that is the state of play, is that people who come here and tell the truth that in ways that are not flattering, to the oil and gas narrative, are seen as controversial, and we have to break through that. An energy transition does not mean that Alberta has to leave it all on the ground. It does not mean we have to shut in our industry. Nobody wants that. Nobody is suggesting that. What it means is we have to adapt, and we're actually pretty good at that here when our backs are against the wall. So that's the challenge in front of us, and we need one part of our political ecosystem to stop blocking that from happening. Right? I think Danielle Smith could be a transformational premier, just like Peter Lougheed, if she used her communication skills to help Albertans understand what we need to do, instead of telling them that we don't need to do it.
You hit the nail on the head. I'm trying to, real quick, go back in our chat. Our chat has just been humming today. You've got it going, Max. But somebody basically said something. I apologize. I don't know who it was, but somebody made a great point that basically said, if I'm working in oil and gas, I want my politicians to be telling me the truth. And like, that was the gist of the comment, and I think it's a good one. Max, we've held you for longer than we asked, but let me just ask you, I'm not going to talk to you again before we find out who's going to occupy, what a loaded word to use, right? Not before we learn who's going to be the next president of the United States. A New York Times poll we talked about last week has the candidates, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, obviously neck and neck at 48% each among decided voters, approximately 50,000 voters really in 5 states or so could determine the outcome of this election. Where's your head at? What do you think is going to happen on November 5th and beyond?
Oof. Yeah, I don't want to say it out loud for risk of jinxing it, but I'm not that important. So I'll do it. I think the Democrats will win. I think people will be surprised by the extent to which Harris wins. I don't think it's going to be a 270, 268 situation. I don't think it's going to be a landslide, but I think that there are a lot of pockets of strength for her that the polls are either not picking up or not able to pick up. I think we have shy Democrats where we used to have quote unquote shy Republicans, but we'll see. I mean, I think the fact that a lot of us find horrifying is that Donald Trump is in this race at all, that it is so close, that it is so competitive. You have somebody who has said and done some just genuinely awful things, and it doesn't seem to be disqualifying. And as America's closest neighbor, that makes me a little nervous. I think it would be easier to have an indifference towards this or see it as a curiosity if you lived in Europe or in Britain or wherever. But we're right next to it. And if Trump wins, if Trumpism wins, then we're back in the blender of trade negotiations. All sorts of climate policy gets thrown out the window. We may have a border crisis of our own. So, we have a stake in this, and I hope that my gut is right. It certainly wasn't in 2016. So here's hoping that it's a different outcome this time.
Yeah. Shout out to Super Chat Ken, who's tossed $5 into the YouTube Super Chat. He says he's always appreciated you on the show. We'll keep a cold one ready for you, Max, in the Real Talk Beer Fridge, courtesy of Super Chat Ken, and to thank Ken for his contribution. Let me, in closing, ask, he made a point I saw earlier in the show. He said, more of a comment, but he said it'll be interesting to see if the price of oil continues to slide. I'll reference as we're talking today, price of, I don't know. I mean, people look at different oil prices, but right now WTI crude per Bloomberg at about $67 a barrel. Ken says it'll be interesting to see if that could push Alberta into deficit, and then to see what the implications of that would be come budget time. Obviously, the entire Alberta budget, and we're not alone, swings big in either direction depending on how international markets look.
And it doesn't have to. That's a choice that we make and continue to make. And I think it's ironic. I'll point out that it may stay in surplus because of Justin Trudeau, because of TMX. TMX has done a really good job of closing the heavy light differentials. So the Western Canadian Select that we tend to export, prices have gone up considerably versus WTI thanks to TMX. So if Alberta does post a surplus, they may want to send a little thank you note to Ottawa. Not that they will, but that they should. So, yeah, I mean, look, we had an opportunity when oil prices were high to kind of make a break and build a budget that doesn't depend so heavily on what happens in global oil markets. I mean, we didn't do it. And so now we're back in the soup. And I think we all just kind of have to hold on for the ride.
Max Fawcett is lead columnist at Canada's National Observer. We encourage you to read his work and subscribe at nationalobserver.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Max Fawcett. I love it behind him on the shelf. He's got his emissions cap. Love that baseball cap with emissions across it. What's have you told us the story of the bat? I know you're a big baseball guy. I see your copy of Moneyball there. What's the story with the bat?
So that is the bat that gets given to the league winner in one of my fantasy baseball leagues. It's very hotly contested. Lots of prominent Albertans who dare not hear their names on this podcast. But it's those bats are precious.
You have a chance right now on Alberta's most popular political podcast, Max, to flex a little bit on your fantasy base. I mean, we've left it for the appropriate time as we wrap things up. But if you'd like to invoke anybody's name, I would like to roll out that red carpet for you.
No,
he's keeping it classy.
I'm tempted to drop Chris Turner's name, but he has a bat too. I think he has two. I think he might have two bats.
Does he?
Turner's a good fantasy baseballer.
Yeah, he sure is, and a smart author as well. I've not spoken to Chris for a while. We should get him back on. He's
have him on.
A book came out. A couple of years ago, How to Be a Climate Optimist. Shout out to Chris Turner. That's the thing. You take your lumps on fantasy baseball on Real Talk, but then we'll promote your book. So I think that's a pretty good deal. Hey,
Max, have you been watching the World Series?
Good call.
Did you think the Yankees would be down 2 at this point? And
do you notice my little, let's see if I can point, my little Freddie Freeman card right up there?
Oh, there you go. What walk-off grand slam to win Game 1.
Insane.
Unbelievable.
That's my guy. That's one of the great Canadians to play baseball and a great human being too. So I'm very happy to see the Dodgers kicking the Yankees' butts.
Yeah, Yankees down -3.
I don't know if I'm happy. I feel like they're both, they call the Yankees the evil empire. I think its second would be the Dodgers. Like, there's just so much money and on the East Coast and the West Coast. those two teams. I don't really care who wins, but it's been amazing to watch. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know that anybody thought that Aaron Judge and his Yankees would be down 3-0. Like with the Dodgers a chance to sweep tomorrow. But it makes the Ohtani contract worth it immediately. Thanks, Max. We'll talk to you again soon, buddy.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Ryan.
Yeah, you as well. Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of people were sort of hoping for like a 7-gamer there in the World Series.
I wanted it to be close. Yeah. I actually wanted to see Mets Yankees. That would have been
cool. The Subway Series. Yeah. I wanted to also note that we're gonna hand out 2 points as well to acute awareness. Johnny, if you could update our Real Talk whiteboard. Acute awareness, happy to remind me that I was thinking of Tom Keenan out of the University of Calgary. You can find him on Twitter at Dr. Future, and he is the author of Techno Creep, The Surrender of Privacy and the Capitalization of Intimacy. Pretty interesting guy. Obviously, lots of like data and privacy experts, and always looking for suggestions from Real Talk as we mean it when we ask you. If there's somebody you'd love to hear on the show, let us know. We got an email from somebody yesterday. Ben Shapiro after the U.S. election, so we'll see what Ben Shapiro's doing. All this time. Hey, man.
I was just happy that whole interview with Max that I don't know how you did it. I want to come over and shake your hand, but you didn't mention Trump Rogan once. And I was like, thank you.
Well, no, because
I know at some point we have a busy week this week and we had other things to do. And you know, there's more pertinent issues in this province and in this country. But at some point, like people keep asking in the chat, we're obviously going to pick apart the interview.
I mean, no, listen, I'm not going to pick it apart.
There's not a lot to pick apart. It was a lot of.
Did you listen to the whole thing?
I went home that night.
Okay.
Watched all 3 hours.
You did?
Yeah, I didn't.
I'm not going to lie to you. I listened to the first, I know exactly 57 minutes. And then whatever, life took over. For me to sit and listen to something for 3 hours has got to be like.
Well, I don't actually listen to every word, but you know, they're on a topic. This is going nowhere. Skip ahead 15 seconds. See where it's going. I saw if there were any sound bites. There wasn't. Like what I wanted to hear was like, because like Joe had a chance to ask him anything. And I mean, the only thing I really thought was entertaining was at the end when he kind of got into like, are there aliens? But like, but like right out the gate, this is Donald Trump. You can ask him anything. He's not going to give a shit. And I felt like it was really, I don't know. It wasn't, I know the numbers are amazing. Don't get me wrong. I know people are watching it. But to me, it was like, I wanted to see something or hear something from Trump I'd never heard. And I feel like Joe had that chance and it kind of, he actually seemed a little nervous. That's the only time I've seen Rogan a little nervous. But then you've got Secret Service and whoever else in the room.
Yeah,
I thought.
I mean, I'll say this. I listened to the first hour, so that's all I listened to, and some of it was kind of. I mean, I don't believe that anything is like throwaway content. You know, that I had this moment interviewing Justin Trudeau. I don't know when it would have been after he won in 2019 when I was on the radio station. And my last question that I asked him, because there had been this story in the news about it was something to do with French's mustard. It was like, you know, the Canadian brand French's mustard. And for some reason, I don't even remember why. It's 5 years ago. But like it was in the news. And so I asked him, like one of the last questions in the interview, I said, what brand of mustard is in your fridge? And I remember people just like, you know, obviously you have critics when you host talk shows and people love to pounce. Some people.
This was the whole thing about how
was the
French's
story?
was American and you should be using Canadian mustard.
Wasn't it Canadian?
Or whatever. No, French's is American.
French's is American.
But what's the one?
What was the Canadian
I remember
mustard?
this whole
and
thing.
You remember the whole thing. Yeah. And like people were turning it into like, and these were like back in the days where like, remember like people were like, you know, Earls couldn't get enough Alberta beef, and so they were going to Kansas to get their beef, and then
for like a week
to boycott Earls.
This was the story.
So it was like a timely question, but also the point is not what kind of mustard he has in his fridge. The point is it's the exact same question as when the reporter, not realizing the golden nugget they were about to receive, asked Trudeau, remember this? When he was at that podium, and I think the water was behind him, he must have been in BC somewhere, and they said, what steps are your family taking to reduce your environmental footprint? And he started going on trying to talk about the boxed water. Remember? And he stuttered and Trudeau's usually really good on his feet. He is. Like politicians, some of them are really good.
But
some of them are
lousy.
lousy.
You throw them a day-to-day personal question.
You throw them a question. Like,
fuck them up.
You know what? One of the best questions you ask a politician, like, how much is a loaf of bread?
Yeah, they don't know.
How much does 2 liters of milk cost? Like, ask these questions, right? So anyway, so I asked Trudeau, what kind of mustard is in your fridge? And like, of course, all the critics that aren't smart enough to understand the interview strategy, like, start pouncing, like, you're wasting all your fucking time with the Prime Minister asking about his fucking mustard. Are you kidding me? You're a joke. You should, this, that, and the other. To bring this back to where we're talking, and the Rogan and the Trump interview, like, out of the gates, if you listen to it, they start talking about, like, he's like taking them back to like 20, he starts wanting to go way back to like 2016 when he won. And he's like, tell me about like the first time you walked into the Lincoln bedroom. And Trump starts going off on this tangent about Abraham Lincoln's son dying. And there's a photo. And
so tall, they had to
he was so tall that the mattress had to be bigger. And I'm like,
yeah.
What? Like, this is 2 weeks out from the election? What? And this is how this is going to start? But I will say, number one, Joe Rogan has 1 million times the audience that I have. So number one. Number two is, like, I do think it's interesting to get people like Donald Trump, like Danielle Smith, like, I'd love to get Pierre Poilievre. I'd love to have a beer on camera with Pierre Poilievre and, like, pick his brain and talk to him how normal people talk. That's kind of our interview style on this show anyway. Ask him questions that normal people want the answers to, because whether it's a politician talking about, I was joking, you did a reel on it, you did a YouTube short on it a couple of weeks ago, that hilarious Jason Kenney story, part of our group chat roundtable, I think it was 2 Fridays ago, where I was, the day that the Tragically Hip announced that Gord Downey had the brain tumor. Obviously, it kind of shook the country to its foundation. You remember that day. And I was interviewing Jason Kenney on my radio show that day, and we came back as Bob Cajun's playing, and I said, what's your favorite hip song? Same strategy. Like, can Jason Kenney name a hip song? It's just interesting insight.
It was great.
He just basically said the answer to his question. He goes, that one, which I thought was pretty smart answer, though, actually.
Thing. Like,
pretty smart answer.
I'll give it to politicians. Maybe they're too busy, but they should know how much a loaf of bread costs. They should listen to music and have a favorite song by a band that's pertinent in the muse, that's like a Canadian staple. But I thought there was some, I'm not shitting on the interview. The numbers are great. Rogan, he
doesn't care what we think.
He's a millionaire from it. But there were some good moments. He asked him, about the scar on his ear. Can I see it? And I thought, oh my God, we're going to get like a close up from the producer. Nothing. He just kind of went like this to his ear. He's like, yeah, I have a little scar, whatever. And then Rogan was kind of there were moments where Rogan was like a little confused, so. And then there was another moment where he asked him, what did he ask him? He asked him about, this was near the aliens thing at the end, expanding into space, and they were talking about Elon Musk, and Trump said something like, who knows, maybe we will find life on Mars. And credit to Rogan, this is one of the most powerful people in the world sitting there with Secret Service agents behind your producer. He said, well, we already know there's no life on Mars, came right back in. And then Trump just kept going. But he corrected him, right? He came back in. I thought there were moments like that.
As you would expect.
But I wanted to see more of that. I didn't want to see him yell at Trump, but I wanted to see him kind of pick apart a few more things. There was another point where he asked about, hacking during the election. He also asked about, all these things, and Trump kept referring to documents. Oh, I have so many documents.
Yeah, well, he's now Trump. Have you seen Trump now says that they've got basically, my words, not his, I can't remember his exact words, but he says they have a big secret or an explosive secret. He's planting the seed that they're already kind of sowing these seeds of doubt around the election outcome. I thought one missed opportunity for Rogan was Trump was talking about tariffs, and this is something that I think is relevant to Canada in a huge way.
He talked a lot about tariffs.
It's probably more relevant to Canada
a weapon,
than any other country on planet Earth in relation to dealing with the Americans and our economic and trade relationship. It's massive. And Trump's talking about big time tariffs. And then Rogan says to him, because Trump kind of hints at it, and then Rogan says, and by the way, folks, the reason we're not playing all the clips is their copyright, and we don't want to have our YouTube episode pulled down or demonetized. So that's why we're not playing the clips. Just like Rogan didn't play clips from The View. But he basically says, Rogan says to Trump, hang on a second, did I just hear you hint that you might replace an income tax with tariffs? And Trump was like, well, I don't know. That might be something that we might. And I was like, no, dig into that. That is a major, are you kidding me? Replacing an income tax? First of all, no presidential candidate is going to want to start talking about that.
Yeah.
That's a major thing to drop all of a sudden with a podcaster. right? 10 days, a week out from the election, you're going to maybe overhaul the entire income tax system. But I did think that was a bit of a missed opportunity, missed one for Rogan. And then, like I said yesterday, talking to Chris from Pembina, I think that something of interest to Canadians and Canadian audience members listening to that interview is Trump's perspective on Canada's water resources.
Yeah,
and that's something we should all be paying attention to.
That scared me a bit. Like he kind of wants our water, but I think everyone wants our water because we have like the most fresh water.
Sure, but if you're going to bend us over
per person, we have the most fresh water.
If you're going to bend us over on trade and tariffs, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're who needs who more?
Yeah.
Probably Canada needs the U.S. more, to be honest with you. But Trump is a protectionist, nationalist, and makes no apology for it. And if that's the way that this relationship's going to go, then Canada better stand that way with our water. And I think that there's some good questions or good conversation to be had about, who might be better served as a Canadian federal leader to be negotiating and dealing with Trump as well.
Well, I think any leader should be for their country. Trump's obviously crazy.
Well, you think
he's all the way in. He's a nationalist. But what I'm saying is there was another point where they were talking about oil and renewable energy, and Trump was talking about how expensive some of the renewable energy is. And then, of course, we had a guest on. Here's the chart right here.
Yeah.
Talking about cost to the consumer.
Describe it for the podcast
So
listeners.
We're looking at a Pembina Institute, just wind and solar on cost. But it also includes every other kind of energy. And this is to build it and then give it to the consumer, whatever. And, right at the bottom is solar and wind. And, nuclear's at the top, which is, again, in the interview, Trump was saying, I think we should do more with nuclear. I think we should have more with nuclear. Great. But it costs more to build, and it costs more to get to people, and it costs more for those people to use that power. So.
Hey, watch what I'm going to do here. Watch this. So we know that solar, the technology is better than ever before. Storage solutions are better. Costs are down. Reliability is up. Installs are quick.
Cheap materials.
But you want to make sure you go with a company you can trust. And that's why we're proud to partner with our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy. It doesn't matter if we're talking about solar on top of the Edmonton Convention Center. They did that unbelievable install. That's like a work of art. Did you know that that's actually poetry? That's art on the solar panels on the convention center. They do residential installations too. That's the lion's share of what they do, but it could be an office tower, a condo building, could be a farm, or it could be your family cottage way out in the middle of nowhere off the grid. Kubi Renewable Energy does it all. You can find out more about their product and services. Check out their blog. They've got great information. And of course, the quote is always free. If you're tuning in from British Columbia, by the way, Kubi's proudly headquartered in BC out of Kamloops. They've got some information on new BC Hydro rebates, a game changer for solar and battery storage in British Columbia. You can find them online at kubienergy.ca. And before we wrap, I wanted to remind you about Alberta Views magazine. We're proud to partner with them, the magazine for engaged citizens. If you missed our debate last week on the show presented by Alberta Views on the Calgary Arena deal, I encourage you to check it out. Pretty fascinating stuff. Their headliner, though, on the front cover of the October issue, why can't you get a family doctor? You can read more at albertaviews.ca. We encourage you to subscribe using the promo code AVRJ. That's Alberta Views, Ryan Jesperson, AVRJ. A year's worth of issues delivered to your door for $20. You can't beat that. I want to thank everybody that was in the live chat today. I mean, some great debate and some absolute lunacy as well. Appreciate that. I think we got a Freeman on the land in the live chat today.
You know what? I just yeah.
I did know it's just pure entertainment, but I appreciate it. Listen, no matter where you're coming from. Some of the best dialogue we've ever seen happens in our Real Talk live chat. So you can join us live at 8:30 Mountain Time, weekday mornings. That's, of course, 10:30 Eastern. Jennifer Lewetz, if you're wondering, you know her on Twitter as Jennifer L. Where she went, she's a political strategist, does a lot of work with First Nations in Saskatchewan, and she's got a last-minute meeting called. One of the nations, I think, probably wants to talk about what happened with the election. So we'll see if we can book her again later in this week. And in the meantime, we do sincerely, as we wrap, want to remind you how much we appreciate your feedback to talk@ryanjesperson.com. The Flamethrower goes Friday, presented by the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. If you're pissed off, fired up about something, send us an email and let us know why. And if there's somebody that you know, a Politico across the country, that would benefit from hearing this episode, our thanks in advance for sharing it with them and encouraging them to join our nearly 20,000 subscribers on YouTube. We'll throw a big party when we hit it. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harman Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjesperson.com.